Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 2 of an actual podcast. I am your host, Matt, here with
Sonja!
and this is our second week or second time doing this. We've been trying to do it every other Thursday, or at least we're going to try to. So if you guys are listening to this, make sure you guys check out our channel over on YouTube, S Family Studios, where we do different variety of things. And if you guys happen to be listening to this on YouTube, please subscribe there, and you can also listen to this podcast on Spotify every other Thursday. Now, before we actually get into the podcast topic for today, I happened to, while you were busy with our son there, I happened to look up the rabies question we were talking about earlier.
The rabies question?
So, we were discussing earlier what happens to humans who contract rabies. Because obviously we know animals, they go insane and they could get aggressive, bite and all that stuff.
Yeah, going on a manhunt.
So I looked into it myself and I found out that apparently with humans, what happens is it, I guess, inflames the brain and the nervous system, and that's how it kills us. And I guess it kills us before we have any aggressive tendencies usually. Depending on where you're bitten, it does seem like it is treatable, so you don't, immediately go dead, if you want to say that. But
you still have to be fast about it.
Yeah, you have to be quick about it. They say anytime you get bit, immediate help. But they also said something along the lines of vaccinations is what they give you, inoculations to the virus, and that's how they kill it once it's in you. But if you get bit in the neck, you're fucked.
Yeah.
No matter what you do, you're not going to be quick enough.
That's the quickest way to the nervous system, and the nervous system is basically your whole body.
I
I was close. I said you go to cardiac arrest and your body basically shuts down and you die. That's close enough.
Yeah, that is basically what happens. Other interesting facts, apparently you're more likely to die from rabies if you're under the age of 15. Or you're more likely to contract rabies. I don't understand that statistic, really. I didn't look too far into it. And another statistic I didn't look into was, in most cases, humans can't spread it to other humans. But apparently there was a case where someone had a cornea replacement. I don't know if it's from a cadaver or what, where they had surgery on their eyes. And apparently whoever the donor was had the rabies, and yeah, apparently killed the other person too.
Well, going back to Scrubs, they did an episode where she donated all her bodily organs. One needed kidney, one needed liver, and one needed something else. And they didn't know how she died. She ended up having rabies, and it killed everybody else that they tried to save.
So the story that they put in Scrubs was based on whatever this story was. Again, I can't verify that this is true. It was just on the WebMD website.
I don't know if it was based on that, but it was basically she was an organ donor, and there was 3 people that needed separate organs, and they gave it to them, and they ended up dying shortly after.
That's pretty fucked up. Of all the ways you could die, somebody having rabies and you get their organs after you think you're going to be saved, that's pretty fucked.
Yeah.
I mean, is it something that they can't test for? I imagine if somebody's oh, I had AIDS before I died, they obviously can't be an organ donor. But if somebody died from rabies, wouldn't you know they died from rabies?
Yes. What happened was they did the organ thing because they thought she committed suicide because she was a depressed person. But when the autopsy come back, that's how they found out that she had rabies. They probably should have waited until the autopsy came back to give the organs. But yeah, well, it's a TV show. Come on.
Well, yeah, I was gonna say that's a TV show's thing, but the real life instance of the person having the eye surgery that ended up dying allegedly, I would kind of be curious about that. If that was the same case, how they didn't know how they died.
Yeah, did they not do an autopsy?
But anyway, with that note, let's get into today's topic.
Human facts.
I just wanted to talk about that because I just looked it up. It was on my mind. I thought it was interesting. Maybe catch somebody's attention to hopefully listen to what I'm about to rant about now, which is, obviously me and Sonja here are adults,
Are we?
I hope. So, what got me thinking the other day is there's a lot of, I guess, cliche adult duties, responsibilities, etc.
Oh, you said duty. I'm sorry, I had to. I don't usually make that joke, but since we're doing the adult thing, I had to.
Oh, man. Okay.
Alright, I'm done.
Well, one of us here is an adult, so... Anyway, there's some responsibilities and stuff that I find, I guess, overrated, or certain things that are expected of you as an adult. And I don't know, I just want to call them out, talk about them a little bit here, for whatever reason, just because I might piss off some people, and I like pissing people off. I think it's funny. But...
Sure.
First thing is actually voting. I think voting is where I want to kick it off, probably the most controversial of these things.
Voting makes no fucking sense because... Sorry. Bleep that. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine.
But voting doesn't really make any sense because it goes by electoral college, and it's like, if the electoral college is like a tie or something like that, then they go to the personal votes, but it's like, that rarely happens.
Well, throughout school, all the time throughout school, they tell you your vote counts. Every vote counts. You know, you got to do.
But it doesn't.
You got to do your duty by voting, and maybe on a small, rural, local scale, it does matter a little bit more. Nationally, it doesn't mean a damn thing, especially when things like the Supreme Court or any branch of Congress can overrule certain things and everything. You vote for an elected official to represent you somewhere else, and they're not necessarily going to represent your ideas anyway. They just say certain things to get into office, and then they say those things knowing full well that their wish list of ideas probably won't ever come to fruition. All politicians are liars, and the point I'm getting to is we're told to vote, we're told our vote matters, but at the end of the day, no matter who you vote for, how you vote, etc., it doesn't seem to give two shits of what's actually going to help us out in this country.
Yeah. Congress controls everything anyway, and if their stuff changed, maybe things would change eventually, but it's not going to.
I mean, a good example is Obama, honestly. I'm just going to go to him because one of his ideas that was a better idea was he wanted better healthcare, universal healthcare for the citizens. But the thing is, we voted him in expecting him to give us that. And what ended up happening is once that idea actually got to the floor, it got changed, it got stripped down, it got messed around with to the point where it's really not all that great.
It wasn't really his fault.
It is for people that maybe don't have insurance, but it's kind of had a blowback onto other things like business and etc. that don't want to hire full time because they don't want to provide benefits, things like that. So at the end of the day, the original good idea ended up being a complete fucking bastardized version of what people voted him in for.
Again, it's because it went through Congress. Congress changed like everything about it, but slapped his name on it. Someone's like, "Thanks, Obama."
And, I mean, if I'm going to shit on Obama, I'm going to shit on Trump now, too. With the stupid idea of his of building the wall that everybody talks about.
Tear down this wall.
Well, it was a dumb idea before he was even elected into office because it wasn't going to solve any immigration issues that we may or may not have. But on top of that, nobody, once the changing of the guard happened and Congress went from Republican to Democrat, there was no way that was going to stand, and I'm pretty sure that after his construction on the wall started, it pretty much stopped. I don't know what the status of the wall is. I just know that it's definitely not anything that... It's definitely not what the original idea was, and the logistical problems of it, I think, immediately became apparent. And people that voted for Trump for something like that, they had to have known better, you would think, but... Moral of the story, voting doesn't matter because even if you vote for somebody thinking they'll help you, they're not going to be able to because they're going to hit every fucking roadblock along the way. Maybe local, that will be alright, maybe that helps, but to me, there's no point to vote. Even voting in elections, like the last two elections, I was like, I don't like any of the candidates. I'm just the South Park argument there, a turd sandwich or a douche.
Yep.
Both the last two presidential elections, I'm like, at least for me, there's a lose-lose here, so there's no point in voting.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, so that was the first thing that I wanted to get off my chest. You, yesterday, when I brought up what the topic was going to be, you said there was something you wanted to mention?
No.
Oh, well, I guess not. So I'm going to move on to my next one. And that is buying a house. Now, I know that's probably not so. It's stupid to say that because I do want to buy a house eventually. But there's reasons why I think the whole idea of home ownership is bullshit. And I'll get into that here in a second. But obviously, for space reasons, being able to have our own yard, stuff like that, a place where we can store all our extra bullshit. I do want a house for that reason, but when I think of everything else, like some people pay less mortgage than people pay for rent.
Yeah.
Understandable, but one, that depends when you buy your house because the housing market is probably one of the most volatile markets there is.
Mm-hmm.
But two, you pay, like, let's say you pay $600 a month for your mortgage, which is low. That's considerably low for a lot of people. But you also have to take into account you're going to be paying property taxes every year. You're going to have to pay for any sort of repairs or equipment you need in your own house because you don't have the landlord that has to take care of that. You're going to have to pay for your home insurance in case anything happens to your house, so that's another bill on top of that.
Yeah, but some people don't pay for or get that.
No, but it's not a bad idea to get it, especially if you live in a place that has a lot of rough weather like we do.
No, I agree. People should have home insurance, but not everyone gets it.
And it's just the thought, like, yeah, renting's not great. You are at the mercy of whoever you rent from about what you can and can't do on your property, and I think that's the biggest drawback. But comparatively, like, you pay your rent every month. You might pay renter's insurance. Some people do that.
Mm-hmm.
And you pay for certain utilities, but even those certain utilities that you're paying for end up being cheaper than paying for, like, a whole house's worth of electricity. Like, without going into too much detail, our electric bill is under $100 here. But I know that people that live in their own house, like a full house, will pay upwards of like $200 to $300 a month just for that.
Some people, yes, but I know others, they only pay like 80 to 100 and something.
Well, yeah, there are different types of plans for electricity depending on where you get your...
No, it's not a plan. That's just how much it is.
I think it depends on where you live and what your personal energy usage is.
Yeah.
I mean, if you have like an air conditioner, washer, dryer, if you have electric heat, all that shit's going to drive it up.
Yeah.
But, and even without electric heat, if you're paying for gas heat, that's going to be expensive too. And not to mention other little things that people probably don't think about, like the fact that you have to buy appliances, you got to get your own lawnmowers, own gas for your lawnmowers, etc. I know, again, it's like, well, those are responsibilities of being an adult. Well, yeah, but the smart thing when you're thinking about it is once you want to do the thing that's saving you the most money.
Is it really saving you money, though?
Renting, I think, saves considerably more money than buying a house. Because buying a house, all the cost of that house is in your hands. Like, right now, let's say our pipes burst for whatever reason in this house. Heaven forbid, please don't do that. In our apartment, rather. If the pipes burst, we don't have to pay for that. That's something that falls onto the landlord's shoulders to take care of.
Yeah, but...
I know you're at the mercy, again, of the landlord for when they get around to it, when they do it, and who they pay to actually do the repairs, but that's still money that's still in your pocket, so...
If you're paying, like, a decent amount, yeah, renting's probably more smart. But when you have slumlords that are charging you $1,200 to $2,000, that's bullshit. Because usually nothing is included with that. They are literally gouging you, and it's like, that's double what mortgage is. So it's like, no, it should be buying your own house. But you can't really afford it because if you won't have good credit, they're like, oh no, you can't get a house. It's like, the cycle just keeps going and going.
I do agree that there are places that are definitely way too expensive, especially right now because everybody in the housing market, both if you're buying or renting, are charging out the ass for everything.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it also depends on location. I know that we were paying $1,500. Not you. Obviously, you weren't with me. This is when I was living near the DC area a few years back. And yeah, it cost roughly about $1,500 a month for rent. And that place, it was an okay place, location-wise and size-wise, but this landlord was absolute fucking dog shit. He had like security cameras on the property, but I don't think he had security cameras for our purpose. I think he had it more for the purpose of spying on us because we didn't have access to those cameras, even though we lived there.
That's creepy.
Yeah. Granted, they were never inside the house. Everything was all outside, or pointing towards the doors, etc. But yeah, that we didn't have access to the cameras. We couldn't see what the cameras were actually recording. And we turned them off a few times because while we couldn't see what they were recording, we had the breaker or whatever that was connected to in the house. We'd always just shut that off.
Yeah.
And he'd get mad. He would call and bitch about it. So damn well he's looking at those cameras often enough.
That'd be against the law.
I don't know how against the law it is because I think a person's allowed to put the cameras on a property they own, and technically speaking, he owns the property. They just were not.
Yeah, but isn't that invasion of privacy?
Not necessarily. I mean, he owns the property. That's just it.
There's a gray area there.
There is a gray area because it was a little creepy. He could technically spy on us while we were outside or doing things that were very close to the doors. But
my last thing I was going to say about that is that, bottom line, rent should not be more than mortgage. It should be way below that.
You would think that would be the more sensible thing, because it's like, why? Because the basic idea is, why would I pay more for rent than I'd pay for my own house? Like I said, the truth of the matter is, you are technically paying way more for your house when you consider everything that goes into it, but
not in some cases.
And not in every case. Again, I think it depends where you live, especially, but
no, I just think overall, bottom line, rent should not be more than mortgage.
And that's going to go into our next part here, which I'm going to say cars. Owning cars, vehicles, I think that's overrated.
Cars are overrated, and we're not the only ones that think this, because I've seen other people say that there should be more public transportation for people.
Well, even when you don't take into account how high gas prices are now, a car, how much you spend on your car per month can sometimes equal just as much, if not more, than what you're paying for housing.
Yeah.
And it's such a double-edged sword, because you need the car, but you don't. In my case, I don't want to put that much money into it. But I mean, who the hell does? Some people want to customize their car or whatever. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about just the gas prices, the insurance, the price of the car loan itself.
Mm-hmm.
Not taking into account when you have to get the oil change, you got to get inspections done, you have to replace tires, because up here you cannot drive on normal tires in the winter.
It's a money trap.
Having to get parts replaced, which the parts are always stupid expensive for some reason.
Yeah. Especially brakes.
Yeah, brakes are really expensive for some reason, depending on where you go. But I've always thought this, and that's why for so long, another story, I guess, here, I never owned a car or even had my license until I was in my 20s. And a big reason for that was, again, thinking of the cost. Now, most of the time, for a good portion of that era of my 20s, at least in my early 20s, late teens, I was able to either get a ride with somebody or walk to wherever I needed to for work, etc. Obviously, though, because we live where we do, that's not sustainable. Eventually, I had to bite the bullet. I had to get a car. I had to, get insurance, get my license. But just thinking about how much money I would save each month, we'd have, I'm saying at a minimum, probably $800 extra a month if it wasn't for that car.
Probably.
And to me, that's ridiculous. That $800 could go to so much other stuff for our apartment.
Savings.
Anything. Food, clothes.
Yeah.
And it's a problem that I know I'm not alone on. I know there are other people that agree with that think that same way. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, because of how unreliable and how even somewhat unsafe and shitty public transport is in the United States, it's unfortunately a necessary evil.
If you're in a city, you have subways. I mean, they're a lot dirtier here than they are in Japan. Japan was oh my god, it's so clean. I could eat off this floor. I wouldn't, but it was that clean. We don't even have buses, and we barely have taxis, and it's I know we're in a small town, but how do we not have nothing?
Yeah, where we live, because there's no major cities, at least not really close to each other, we usually just have like one or two buses that run multiple towns. And therefore, they're not very reliable because they can show up late or they can be full by the time they get to you. Especially because we live in an area where there's a lot of Amish people. And the Amish people do take the bus as well when they need to go places. Quite frankly, I'm wondering if a horse and buggy is cheaper than a car. But
I don't know. Horses are high maintenance.
Horses are high maintenance, but I have to think that horse feed is cheaper than gasoline these days.
Probably.
But, yeah, going back to Japan, when we lived in Tokyo... Lived? Oh my god, I wish we did.
Yeah, we stayed there.
When we stayed in Tokyo a couple years back, just using their public transport as, I guess, an underlying thing, there were multiple forms of transport that were on time, that ran efficiently. Granted, again, you're in Tokyo, but they ran so efficiently that there were very few vehicles outside of delivery vehicles that we even saw normally. Even delivery vehicles for things like pizza places. I don't know why I said pizza places because there's not that many there, but they're bicycles and they were still efficient.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I think some of them were bicycles, but I think some of them
had
were
scooters
electric bicycles, so they could still go a little faster. But again, you can rent bicycles there. They have parks and stuff. You just pay for the day or something like that. Unchain it, you're good.
I promised that we weren't going to ride Japan's dick as part of this podcast, but I mean, just if we're talking about this particular issue that I have,
there are some things that Japan does right, and it's the world needs to learn from them. I think they have their flaws too.
I think Canada as well, in the bigger cities, has a better public transport system there as well. I could be wrong.
I don't know.
I think I've heard that Ottawa, Toronto, etc. have pretty decent buses and taxi services, not counting Lyft or Ubers. My God, speaking of, when I was in New York City, that was ridiculous. I should never have to pay more to go one way on a trip than I'd probably pay in my own car. It was $70, $80, I think, just to get from Madison Square Garden back to my hotel.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank
God. It was 10 minutes.
Yeah, it wasn't even that far. The only reason I even get a taxi is because it's still a little too far to walk. Mm-hmm. But
I would love to walk, but you have to be right in the city, and that's those are hard to get and they're more expensive. So, yeah.
And okay, so the next thing I'm going to move on to is, I guess, a little weird because it really depends who you're talking to, if this is considered an adult thing. But a lot of people, I remember when I was growing up, how my grandfather had nothing in his life but work and going to bed. And he was one of the most miserable fucking people I knew. But there are still people that say that way of life is more adult, more responsible than the way of life of somebody actually having hobbies or not making their whole life about work. I'm not saying that you don't work or anything like that.
No, that's nothing like saying.
I'm saying for someone like him where his whole life was work for one reason or another, and he never had anything to show for it. He was always replaceable at his job, even if he was one of the hardest workers there. Because he was out for several months once he injured himself, and it wasn't like they were missing anything or lacking for people. So, to me, giving my whole life, giving my devotion to a job when I could spend that energy with my family, etc., and my hobbies, to me, that seems more adult than being a servant to someone else.
It's kind of funny you went to this topic, because this is what I was thinking about. It's the thing is, I have a few problems with working. I mean, job-wise, not working. That was worded wrong. The thing is that you are replaceable, even if you're one of their best workers or hard workers, but it's always that the hard workers, if they take a moment of to relax or something, they yell at you. But then the slackers are always praised for doing something. It's oh my God, they did their job. What about the people that have been doing their job and doing a best job? I don't need a golden star or a pat on the back, but it's to be recognized would be better than these freaking slackers who get like a pat on the back. It's like, what the hell?
Well, what I'm arguing about here is going to be twofold. One is just spending your whole life working
I was getting that too.
without any sort of hobby or backdrop, just making like your whole life about that. That hard work gets you respect for sure from certain people, but not from the people that matter.
Yeah.
And I'm sure my mother, for example, probably would have liked to have had her father home a hell of a lot more than at work, but that wasn't how it was for her. And when he was home, and like I said, when my experience with him, he was always fucking miserable because he never took any time to do anything else with his life. And that's probably why I have such a jaded view of working for corporations, etc. I think if you work for yourself, you make money yourself, own your own company, and you can actually say that you're not replaceable, you're not expendable because you are the company, then that's great. I think that's great. That's something I think everybody should pursue. Obviously, it's not that easy, but if you're able to, then I definitely would say go for it. Now, where the other prong of this argument is coming from is that I was always told, like, when I was growing up, that I had to outgrow things like video games and shit like that. Like, oh, you gotta grow up, you can't play video games your whole life, and you can't be into comics or card games. That's all child stuff. Listen, maybe back in that time era, that stuff probably would have been seen that way. But the thing is, when you look at the difference in time, the same people I would say that would collect things like, say, for example, old Coca-Cola memorabilia or
baseball cards,
hats, etc. And they would still hold on to those. They would still even collect them well into adulthood. And why? Because it gave them joy as a child.
I don't understand.
It's a nostalgia thing. And the fact that they, at least at a time, looked at my hobby and the thing I'm most into now as something that I shouldn't be into now, when their hobbies and interests literally stem from their childhood as well. I always thought it was kind of a...
Well, I have two problems. One, how is a hobby childish? Number two, it makes you happy. Like, what?
And that's the other thing. Like, if I didn't have stuff like this for when I come home, not counting, like, you and our son to kind of keep me company, keep me occupied, I'd be a very boring person. I'd have nothing to do. I'd probably be even more pissy and depressed than I already am, and I'm already miserable. So...
Well, going back to that, like, the whole work is your life thing. I had a job, I mentioned this kind of before, it was, like, my second job. It was a good paying job, I was getting decent hours, but it was to a point where I was missing birthday parties, family reunions, my friends, and I could barely even see you. So I was like, what life am I living here? I'm always here. I work here, go home, go to bed, because I was, like, I'd work all freaking day into the night. So I'd literally go home, have an hour to myself, go to bed, and do it all again the next day. And I'm like, I'm only, like, 22 at the time or something like that. And I was like, I already feel like I'm 50 years old because of this job. And I couldn't take it anymore. I went into a very, very dark area, and I'm like, never again. So my thing is, if I'm making less money, fuck it. I'm living my life now. So I'm like, my son and my husband, my whole thing, my family.
I think my argument, I don't know, it was a little scatterbrained on this particular point. I think what it is the idea that being an adult means you don't have time for fun or to do other things. First of all, the people that say that usually still have something they do for fun or they make time for. They just don't realize it. A lot of people, for some reason, have to go out to the club and get hammered every weekend. Oh, I have time off, so I'm going to go do that. So those same people are like, well, why do you have time to play XY game or read this book? It's like, because I spend my time in a different way than you do. That's all there is to it. So I guess my argument is that there is if I want to call it the adult think that you don't have time to follow your passions, and that's bullshit. And if you think like that, you're gonna end up miserable.
Well, they think to say it's like, oh, you retire at 65 and you only got like 11 years to like live life. Like, fuck that. Like, live now. don't regret it while you're young and stuff like that. And that's basically what I do. Like, live my life to the fullest. Don't take anything for granted. That's my life motto.
I think that is a good point to kind of cut this episode off. There is other things, but these were kind of like the things that I hear all the time is like, oh, now that you're an adult, this is what you have to be like. This is the box you have to fit into. So I was just kind of wanting to argue against that. And like I said, there's obviously more, but I do thank you guys for watching or listening, depending on if you're on YouTube or if you're on Spotify or Anchor. We will be back 2 weeks from now. And this time, Sonja is going to have a topic to bring to the table that she wants to talk about. So we will see what that is then. But until then, thanks for listening, and we hope you join us next week.
I have one thing to add before we close it up.
Hopefully you didn't click off the video yet. We're not done.
Sorry, I was just going to say.
Click off the podcast.
You're only old as you feel, or is what that saying is going. And just make sure you have fun. You only get one life. Have fun. Do you, man.
Did you just YOLO to end this?
I didn't YOLO. I said you only live once.
That's the same.
No, I don't say YOLO.
Thank you for listening. Have a great day.